Hey everyone, welcome to another live streaming. This is the episode 19 of the Music Theory for Guitarists live streaming series every Friday on YouTube. We talk about music theory from a guitarist perspective, and we try to, understand all things about music theory, starting from the easy things like names of the notes on the fretboard, till the more advanced things, like what we're going to talk about tonight, which is mainly chord substitutions. Okay, so hopefully guys you watched the previous episodes of this series where I talked about how you build up different chords from triads to tetrads, seventh chords, extended chords. We talked about the 9th, the 11th, the 13th. We talked about all sorts of scales, from the major scale, chromatic scale, major scale, pentatonic scale in the last episode last week. We talked about the major scale, the minor scales, and all the modes of the major scale. And we talked about how to harmonize a major scale and the minor scale so that you guys can understand in which key you are every time you play a specific chord progression, every time you play a song, really. Okay, I'm just going to double check if everything is all right with the audio as always. Let's see how this goes. Let's see. Should be fine. I'm sorry for the return in the audio, but it's just to double check that everything is all right. Guys, while you join this live streaming, feel free to say hi, leave your name in the live chat, and let me know if everything is all right with the audio and the video. So as I said, tonight's live streaming is about chord substitution. So let's introduce what we mean by chord substitutions. We basically mean every time that we play a chord progression and suddenly we hear a chord that we weren't expecting, okay? And those chords are often there because they are chord substitutions following a few rules, okay? Now, this kind of thing requires a little bit of time and a little bit of practice before you can really fully master the chord substitutions. And I did a few more videos about specific chord substitutions. So I link as many resources as I can, which are available on my channel about this in the description below. They are already there, even if you're watching this live. So if you are interested in understanding more about the single topics that we're going to talk about tonight, you find everything linked in the description below. You might want to open and save, maybe bookmark these videos to have a look at them later on. Okay, so with these chord substitutions, we basically are talking about when, for example, you find an external chord from the harmonization, okay, but without getting into a modulation, so without changing the key of the song that you're playing. Or, for example, when you borrow a chord from elsewhere. Okay, so all these sort of things are chord substitutions, okay, where you, for example, take one chord and you replace it with another, or when there is no substitution in the music that you are playing, but you feel like you can replace one chord with another, following one of the rules that we're going to talk about tonight, okay? So hopefully this makes sense to introduce what the chord substitutions are. Now, I made a list about the chord substitutions that I want to talk about tonight. So the very first one that I've got here is actually one of the most popular. I got asked all the time about this rule, and therefore I really want to spend some time on it. I also made a video about it that it's linked in the description, as I said, and I'm talking about the secondary dominant. Now, the secondary dominant is when, for example, you have a chord progression like this. In the key of C major, and you get something like so what did I do basically? When I was going from my first chord to the second chord, I introduced an external chord, which was this A7 here that we're going to talk about now. We're going to analyze this, which is not part of the harmonization of the key, the harmonization of the C major scale, and it was just a passing chord, just something really cool that I could use to basically introduce the chord that I'm going to next, which was my D minor. So let's see together how I actually did that. Basically, the chord progression, just to make an example together, was very simple, and it's in the key of C major. It's made by C major 7, first degree, of course, D minor 7, which is the second degree, of course, and then the F major 7, which is the 4. Okay, so it's simply 1, 2 minor, and 4 major 7. Now, when I go from 1 to 2, I can do that through a dominant 7th chord. Now, in the key of C major, like in any other major key, you only have one dominant 7th chord, and that is on the 5th degree. So in the key of C major, that means G7. Now, that is usually known as the primary dominant 7th chord, because that is the dominant 7th chord of the key, okay? So any other dominant 7th chord that you find in a chord progression, which doesn't belong to the key, so it's not the 5th degree, will be a secondary dominant 7th chord. Instead of being the primary dominant 7th, it's actually the secondary dominant 7th. Let's have a look at this. So if I play C, then I play D minus 7, then at some point I go to G7. That sounds okay, we are in the key of C major, and this will be the tension, the 5 of the key. But if instead I do what I did before, introducing another dominant 7 chord which doesn't belong to the key, which is in this case A7, well, what I'm doing, I'm taking a dominant 7 chord which is external to C major, and I'm only using it because it's the 5 of the chord that you're going to. So I look at my chord progression from the perspective of the chord that I'm going to, which is D minus 7 in this case. I pretend that D minus 7 is the 1, okay? And I think of which one would be the 5, the 5th degree, basically, the dominant 7th chord on the 5th degree, to get to this fake one that I'm pretending is the one, the D minus 7, okay? And the dominant, so the 5th degree of D is A, so I can play an A7 and create a mini 5-1 in the key of D minor, A7, D minor 7, okay? Which is not really a 5-1, but it's D minor 7 is the 2, as we know, 1, 2 minor, and A7 is the 5 of the 2, okay? You would analyze that with the Roman numerals as 5 with a V Roman number, 7 to say it's a dominant 7, / 2 minor. 2 minor with a small letters. This is just to say it's the 5th degree of the second that you're going to. Okay, listen to how it really changes the mood of what you're creating. It goes into a more tension from here. It becomes. Okay. Now, like the name suggests, when we say secondary dominant 7th chord, this kind of substitution only involves a dominant 7th chord. So you can't use another chord to go to this fake one that we're going to, which is D minor 7, but you must use a dominant 7th chord. Okay. You can also use it to replace a chord which is already in the chord progression and make it dominant 7th. Okay, although originally it wasn't a dominant 7th. Let's make this example together. If I start again from C major 7 1st degree, I could, for example, go to the 6th minor, A minor 7, and then to D minor 7, 2 minor. Now, the A minor 7 belongs to the key of C major. It's the 6th degree minus 7, but I can make it dominant 7, so I can replace the A minor 7 with an A7 to make it the secondary dominant of D minus 7. Again, it's secondary dominant because the primary dominant would be G7. So I say 1 major 7, the 6 minor now becomes a 6 dominant 7, which goes to the 2 minor. Okay, that's how you want to use the secondary dominant substitution. Okay, chord substitution. Okay, this is one example of it. And again, if you want to find out more, you find a video linked in the description below. We can now move on to a similar but different chord substitution, which is the tritone substitution, which again, it's a very popular topic. And many people wonder about what tritone means. Basically, guys, tritone only means 3 tones, so 3 whole steps. And it's a specific interval. It's the distance between one note and the note which is 3 whole steps higher or lower, because the tritone divides the octave into equal parts, okay? So if I go, excuse me, so if I go 3 whole steps higher than C, I find G flat. If I go 3 whole steps lower than C, I find G flat as well. Okay, that's the tritone. Now, when you play the tritone interval together between 2 notes, it sounds like a dissonance. Okay, the classics used to call this the diabolus in musica, which means basically the devil in the music, and it was the name in Latin of this interval, okay, in classical music. And the whole point is, when you play these 2 notes with an interval of 3 whole steps, that sounds quite dissonant, okay? Now, this is the reason why you find a tritone interval, so I'm talking about 2 notes like that, in a dominant 7 chord. In every dominant 7 chord, you find this kind of stuff. So within every dominant 7 chord that you find, there is a tritone, and that is the reason why it sounds that tensive, okay? And that tritone is hidden between the major third and the minor 7th of a dominant 7 chord. And you find that all the time, guys, when you play a blues, for example, right? Okay, I don't want to play the whole blues. We'll do an entire live streaming about blues next week. If you guys are interested in blues, make sure to make a note about next Friday's live streaming, which will be all about the blues. But when I was playing this chord, look at this. There is a tritone. When I go to the 2nd chord of the blues, the 4th, the Greek, there is a tritone. So that's just to demonstrate once more how tensive the tritone interval is. Hey, Leo, how you doing? Good to see you. So basically, where to use certain chord types and progressions based on genres. Well, that it's quite interesting, and I think this is more related about cliches of typical styles and genres. Like, look at the style of music, the types of music, like basically like languages, okay, where you have certain cliches to say something. I made a video a few months ago on my channel. You can find it, which is called like 8 music styles, 1 chord progression, where I take basically a simple chord progression made by 4 chords, and I show how these chords become, depending on the style that you're going to play, rhythm-wise, in terms of extensions, in terms of whether to use the 7th chords. So if you're interested in that, go to my channel, surf through the videos, and you will find one which is called 1 chord progression, 8 music styles, or the other way around, where I talked about that. Okay. So basically, we learned now what a tritone interval is. We need to understand now what a tritone substitution is. Okay. Awesome. So let's say this thing. The tritone substitution only involves a dominant 7th chord. So in this sense, is similar. It's similar to the secondary dominant substitution, but it can only replace a dominant 7th chord. And this is the difference with the secondary dominant. The secondary dominant is not necessarily replacing a dominant 7 chord. In fact, we were replacing a minor 7 with a dominant 7, while instead the tritone substitution only replaces a dominant 7th chord with another dominant 7th chord. Okay, so keep this in mind as a basic thing to know about the tritone substitution. It doesn't apply to other types of chords which are not dominant 7th chords. Okay, it only applies to dominant 7th. Now, how does it exactly apply to a dominant 7 chord? You take any dominant 7 you want to play. Now, for the sake of this example, I'm gonna take a G7. Okay, just because G7 is the primary dominant, the 5th degree in the key of C major, so we can stick to the same key. And I'm gonna say, well, the dominant 7th chord that I play here is mainly made by G, which is obviously my root note, and then these two notes with a distance of a tritone between each other, F and B being major 3rd and minor 7th. Okay, yes, there is also a perfect 5th, so you can look at the G7 like this, but mainly, especially when you are in a jazz environment, you just do this thing here. Okay. Now, these two notes are also the two notes with a tritone interval in the chord of a D flat 7. And between G and D flat, the distance between these two notes is a tritone. So once more, you can take a dominant 7 chord and replace it with another dominant 7th chord with a distance of 3 tones from the original one. So from G, 3 tones higher or even 3 tones lower for what we said before about the way it divides the octave into equal parts, you find D flat. So if I go to D flat and I play a D flat 7, I can basically replace the G7 with a D flat 7. Now, analyzing the notes which really matter in a dominant 7 chord, these two notes F and B, which are basically major 3rd and minor 7th when you play a G7, are the same two, are in common, are mutual notes with a D flat 7, and the role is the other way around. The F becomes basically, it's the major 3rd, of course, but you should call the B C flat. But again, it's the same thing enharmonically, and they're going to be the major 3rd and the minor 7th of a D flat 7. Okay. Now, we did talk about alternate dominant 7th chords in one of the previous episodes of this series. Now, just to make a 1-second recap, a dominant 7 chord with alterations, it means that it has either one or more of the 4 possible alterations: flat 5, sharp 5, flat 9, sharp 9. Now, if I take the G7 and, for example, I play it with a flat 5 like this, so root, minor 7, major 3rd, and flat 5. Now, this note that I'm adding as a flat 5 is actually a D flat. Okay, so that when I play this chord, the D flat 7, I'm sharing all of the notes that I was playing in the G7 flat 5. So literally I'm looking at it almost like an inversion of a G7 flat 5 rather than a chord substitution. Okay, I hope this thing makes sense, guys. As always, you can feel free to ask anything you might want to know about these things that I'm mentioning and more in the live chat. Okay, if you're watching this live, take advantage of that. Ask anything you feel like in the live chat. And once more, thanks a lot for your support and for watching my videos and my live streamings. If you feel like supporting the channel even more, you can use the live chat with the super chat and super stickers to show your support, or you can just simply like this video, and this is already a big support for the channel. Okay, so what I wanted to say about this tritone substitution is that depending on whether you want to look at it as a flat 5 chord or a normal dominant 7 chord when you start, okay, you might share either only 2 notes, the 2 most important notes of a dominant 7 chord when you replace it with a tritone substitution, or you might share all of them if you look at it as a G7 flat 5. I think you can all see this thing going on here. Okay. Now, there are other ways of looking at it. What if I start instead from a G7 sharp 5 instead of a flat 5, which is another way of playing a G7 altered dominant 7 chord. Well, in this case, if I start from here and I now replace this with a D flat 7, I can say that the D flat 7 extended to the 9th will include the same alteration, okay, as the G7 sharp 5. Okay, so that is again another way of looking at it. Okay, hopefully this makes sense, guys. And again, when you, for example, talk about the note G within a D flat 7, so if you play this and you maybe play it like this, I know this is not the most common, but it's just to show you an example. This is a D flat 7 with the major 9th, but with the flat 5. Okay, so if you do this thing, the note that you play as a flat 5, of course, is the note G. So they are interchangeable. So again, to recap this Tritone substitution, guys, you start from a dominant 7th chord and you replace it with another dominant 7th chord with a distance of 3 whole steps, which is called tritone. Okay, and the reason is because they share many notes in common, so they will deliver the same kind of tension feel. And now we'll apply this to an actual music example. Manas has a question. He says, I have zero theory knowledge about music theory for guitar, but I know all the guitar techniques from shredding to alternate picking, sweep picking, have a bit knowledge of chord theory. Where should I get started? Well, it's very simple. So I don't know if you're new to this channel and if you're new to this series, but I make live streaming videos on YouTube every week, and they are about music theory for guitarists. This is the episode 19. That means that there are another 18 that you can watch, where I take it from a very, very beginner level, you know, literally starting from no theory, no previous theory knowledge, and we'll get it step by step until the things that we're talking about tonight. So what you can do after this live streaming, you can go back to the episode 1 of this series that you find linked in the description below. There is an entire playlist with all of the episodes. And without watching them all, you can establish yourself where you need to start from, because for each video, for each live streaming, you will find a timetable, the timestamps showing you the chapters and showing you what are the topics included in each of the live streamings. So depending on whether you already know some of them, you might want to skip some and go directly to the ones that you feel you need. Okay, so every time you go through the topics, if you find that you don't know what that topic is, or you're not very comfortable with that yet, you might want to watch that topic, and you'll do so just looking at the timestamps that you find in the videos, or you find it even for these videos. In fact, for this video, for tonight's video, at the end of the live streaming, I will add the timestamps so that whoever wants to rewatch this live streaming, or if someone wants to watch the replay for the first time, you will see all of the topics, all of the chapters of the things we are talking about tonight. Okay, hopefully this helps. Let me know. And yes, Leo, you're absolutely right. More to study. Great. So yeah, definitely. So that's how the Tritone substitution works, but let's listen to it, okay? Let's start again from the same chord progression, or actually from a similar chord progression. Let's start from a classic. There is one classic which is called the turnaround. The turnaround is a chord progression which goes 1, 6 minor, 2 minor, 5, okay? Obviously the 1 is a major 7 and the 5 is a dominant 7 chord, okay? Now I can, for example, and by the way, I can do the same thing I was showing you before, even with a G7 13th, if you want to extend it to the 13th and replace it with a D flat 7 sharp 9, which will involve the same extension. That said, hopefully this makes sense if you are comfortable with the chord extensions. That said, guys, if I now replace the G7 with a D flat 7, the chord progression of the turnaround, which used to be now becomes almost not notice any variation to what I played before, although I replaced my G7 fifth degree with the D flat 7, which is the Tritone substitution of the fifth degree. So in your chord analysis with the Roman numerals, you will write it as sub 5. So that means Tritone substitution of the fifth degree, basically. Okay. Now you could even combine the secondary dominant substitution that we learned before with the Tritone substitution. So in this example of C major 7, A minor 7, D minor 7, G7, if I look at the A minor 7, which was our sixth degree minor, that we previously replaced with an A7 just to make the secondary dominant to go to D minor, I can now replace the A7 itself, which is a secondary dominant, so it is already a chord substitution. I could replace it with its tritone, which would be E flat 7. So instead of playing C major 7, A7 to go to D minor 7, I will now replace the A7 with E flat 7, and it will be C major 7, E flat 7, E minor 7, etc. Now, if you guys didn't know about these substitutions, it would sound, or it might look really strange to see that in the key of C major, I can actually use an E flat 7. You know, it seems to be very far away from the key of C major, from the harmonization of the C major scale. So now you can justify this thinking of two different chord substitutions. First, a secondary dominant, A7, which replaces an A minor 7, and it creates the tension, the 5, to go to the second degree. But then you replace this with its tritone, which is going to be E flat 7, okay, which is the sub 5 of the 5 of the 2, or the sub 5 of the 6 dominant 7, okay, which is the A7 in this case, okay. That said, guys, you can combine them. You can replace one secondary dominant with a tritone substitution, or you can use them both. So why not go back to our turnaround in C, and now instead of replacing the G7 with a D flat 7, we use them both. Half the value of the G7 stays as G7. The second half of it becomes a D flat 7, and it goes like, this is the original one. And now it goes like, so I use both G7, D flat 7, and go to C major 7. That's how you can use the tritone substitution together with the original dominant 7 chord, okay? So you can replace the original dominant 7th, or you can use them both, okay? Just to spice up things a little bit, okay? If you guys are interested in finding out more about these tritone substitutions applied to the chord progression that I'm playing now, which is the turnaround, linked in the description, one of the resources that I put was how you can spice up combining and using all of these chord substitutions, a jazz turnaround, so a 1-6-2-5. It's linked in the description below. If you guys want to see more about all of these topics that I appreciate they might be a little bit more advanced, you find them all in the description below. Okay. Now, moving on from the tritone substitution, the next one that I've got here still says secondary, but it says secondary diminished 7th chord. Okay. So what does it mean? Didn't we say that the secondary could be only a secondary dominant? Well, yes, but also no. What I mean is, yeah, we can only replace it with a dominant 7 chord, but when you learn that a dominant 7 chord extended to the 9th includes, extended to the flat 9, the minor 9th, so an altered dominant 7th, includes a diminished 7th chord, you appreciate that you can actually use that, okay? Now, I made a few examples of these in my acoustic chord progressions in the R&B and neo-soul acoustic guitar series that you find on this channel. If you haven't watched any episodes of them, you find the full playlist, again, linked in the description below. But the whole goal is try to listen to things like this, okay? That's a classic, you know, R&B chord progression. In this case, I was in the key of C sharp minor. Now, how about I throw in a diminished seventh chord like this? I'll do it again here. It's definitely really cool. It's almost jazzy, I would say, but definitely it spices up even more what you're playing, and it sounds even more, you know, R&B, especially neo soul. I would say neo soul is when you combine even more jazzy elements into an R&B dynamic. Now, the whole point is, I basically added a diminished seventh chord just before coming back to the first degree, which was C sharp minor seventh in this case. So why can I do this? Well, again, this is related to the secondary dominant concept. That's why it's called secondary. So if I want to replace my C sharp minor 7, well, not really replace the C sharp minor 7. If I want to reach the C sharp minor 7, which is my first degree, with a dominant seventh chord, because I want to add a secondary dominant chord substitution, I would play definitely a G sharp 7. Okay. Now, the names with the sharps might be a little bit confusing, so this wasn't probably the best key to choose, but you know, let's stick to this now for the sake of this example. So G sharp 7 would be the secondary dominant to go to C sharp minor 7. All right. Although it wasn't in the chord progression that I was playing, because I was playing C sharp minor 7, then I was playing an A major, 6-9 maybe, then I was playing an F sharp, minor 11, a G sharp, minor 11. So the minor 11 is an extension of a minor 7, right? So this is the 5 minor in the key of C sharp minor. Well, I can take this C sharp minor 7, C sharp minor 11, and instead replace it with a G. Sorry, I said C sharp, with a G sharp minor 11 or G sharp minor 7th, and replace it with a G sharp 7 to go to C sharp minor. It will sound like a 5-1, right? That's what I mean. Dominant 7, secondary dominant 7, going to the 1. Well, this chord here, G sharp 7, when it's extended to the flat 9, so for example, you can think of it like this shape, if you are familiar with these more advanced shapes, involves a diminished 7th position. In fact, I could play this way. So this is a G sharp 7, you know, that's a G sharp 7, adding the flat 9, which is the note A in this case, and that's a G sharp 7 flat 9. Now, if I remove the G sharp note, so if I remove the root, which is something that sometimes we do in music, right? We play chords, especially when they have many notes, we play them rootless, so without the root. What we are left with is a diminished 7th chord, right? Now, more about how you can look at extended chords as a bass note plus a 7th chord. Later on in this live streaming, it will be the last topic for tonight. But for now, let's just say that if I have a diminished 7th chord with this note on the bass, that's a G sharp 7 flat 9. Now, if I remove the G sharp, I'm left with a diminished 7th chord, we said. And this diminished 7th chord, like any other diminished 7th chord, is a symmetric chord. So that means that the distance between all of these notes is equal, and it's a minor third. So between this note and the next one, there is a minor third, so 3 semitones. Between this and this, there is again, 3 semitones, this and this, 3 semitones, this and back to this, 3 semitones. So it's like a circle, and it divides equally. It divides equally the octave in 3 or no 4, in this case in 4 equal parts. Okay, this is just because the distance between the notes is made this way. So that means that I can play this chord here, I can play this chord here, I can play this chord here, I can play this chord here. Because a diminished 7th chord, it will always be an inversion of itself. So when I play this and I play this, or when I play this and I play this, I'm including the same exact notes. Okay, just changing which one to put on the bass. In this sense, it's an inversion of itself. So this chord here includes exactly the same notes as this, same notes as this, and so on. So if you look at it here, you might think, well, this is an F sharp note, right? So this is an F sharp diminished 7th, but I wasn't playing an F sharp diminished 7th in my chord progression. I was playing a C diminished 7th to go to C sharp minus 7. Why is that? Because if I keep moving this F sharp diminished 7th that I found before, I'll get an A diminished 7th going a minor third higher, and then I'll get a C diminished 7th. So here is where it comes from. Now, if I play it instead of the root on the D string with the root on the A string, I get this position. Again, if you're unsure about these positions, go back to the episodes 8 and 9, where I talked about all of the positions you must know to understand all of these concepts fully on guitar. Okay, so this C diminished 7th is nothing but the upper part of the G7 flat 9. Because the G7 flat 9 was the secondary dominant of a C sharp minor of the 1, I'm now removing the root G sharp, and I'm left with, for example, a C diminished 7th going here. I said for example because instead of this I could play this, a minor third higher or lower. You know, it's gonna be the same chord as we demonstrated between these. Okay. So, or you might want to use them both, which I did sometimes in one of the episodes of my R&B and neo soul acoustic guitar series. So again, instead of playing this G7, which is usually not played as a normal G7, it's usually played with at least one extension, because we are going to a 1 which is minor, and the 5-1 of a minor, we talked about it in the 2-5-1 minor explanation. The 5 of a minor key is usually a dominant 7 chord with an alteration, and the flat 9, it's one of the best alterations that you can play to go here. Okay, so when I do that, I replace the G7 flat 9, which was already the secondary dominant, with a diminished 7th chord, which is not really a replacement. It's already included in the G7, in the G sharp 7 flat 9. So we could say that what we call the secondary diminished 7th chord, this, is included in the secondary dominant chord. So in this sense, you look at them as, yeah, different chord substitutions, but at the end of the day, they are the same chord substitution. Okay, but now listen to the sound to fully understand how cool it is when you know these chord progressions, right, with these chord substitution. Sense. Again, take advantage of the live chat. Let me know if you have questions about this. Okay, and if you want to go deeper on all of these topics, there is more about all of them in the description below. Okay, so that's for the secondary diminished 7 chord substitutions, which I also talked about analyzing a specific song by Alicia Keys, which is If I Got You. I made an entire video about the chord analysis, the harmonic analysis of If I Got You by Alicia Keys, and you find that in the description below. And I use that chord progression as an excuse, basically, to introduce on my channel what a secondary diminished 7th substitution is. Okay. Now, that said, we're left with one more chord substitution called diatonic chord substitution. I'll go very quickly over this because, you know, not many people talk about it. It's not the most exciting one, but it's just to say that in music, you should always divide the 7 chords that you find in a specific key. For example, in the key of C major, you have C major 7, D minor 7, E minor 7, F major 7, G7, A minor 7, B half diminished, in 3 families of chord or categories, really. Now, one is called the dominant family, which is where you find the 5th and the 7th degree, like the G7th and the B diminished 7th. And we'll say in a minute why. Because a B diminished 7th with a G on the bass, it becomes a G7 9 or a G9, okay, like this. But we'll talk about this in a minute. Then you have the tonic family, which is basically where you find the 1, the 3, and the 6, okay? And then you have the subdominant family, which is made by the 2 and the 4, okay? Once you know these families or categories of chords within the harmonization of the major scale, you can take one of these chords and replace it diatonically with other chords of the same family within the same harmonization. What does it mean? Let's say again that I've got my 1, 6, 2, 5, my turnaround in the key of C major. Now, instead of playing C major 7, A minor 7, D minor 7, G7, which is my turnaround, I can replace the 1, my C major 7, so the chord which is the tonic chord, with the 3rd degree, the E minor 7, because it belongs to the same family. And we'll see in a minute with the extended chords explanation how the E minor 7 is really close to a C major 7, and effectively it would be the same as playing a C major 9 without the note C. Okay, so every time you play an E minor 7, if you place a C on the bass, you get C major 7. We're going to talk about that in a minute, but these are things that as guitarists for us might be a little bit more advanced. But if we were playing the piano, I do have a keyboard here. If we were playing the piano, this would be very easy to see, because every time that your right hand is, for example, playing an E minor 7, if you just add the note C on the bass with the left hand, you get a C major 7. It's very simple to see. And we should try and look at the fretboard of the guitar, and in the same way as a piano player looks at the keyboard. Okay, so yeah, I think that this is very important if you want to really progress into something more advanced on guitar. That being said, let's say this thing. Instead of playing this, I'm now replacing this with the E minor 7, and my turnaround becomes which is still lovely. And I really love the sound that you get from all this, okay? But now, what if I combine this boring or less exciting diatonic substitution with the secondary dominant substitution that we talked about before, and our 6th degree, which is the A minor 7, I make it an A7 because I want to create the tension to go to D minor 7. Well, then my turnaround, which used to be this, and it became with the chord substitution of the E minor 7 diatonic substitution, it became this. It now becomes, when I use both the E minor 7 diatonic substitution of C major 7 and the A7 secondary dominant of A minor, or replacing the A minor 7 to go to D minor 7, it becomes this. What does it look like? This looks like I'm doing a 2, 5, 2, 5 with a distance of 1 whole step between each other. But this 2, 5 it's just another way of looking at the turnaround in C that I was playing before. 1, 6, 2, 5. I just applied 2 simple chord substitutions. The 1st degree replaced with the 3rd minor, that's the diatonic substitution. The 6th degree replace with the secondary dominant of the two, A7, and you get 2, 5, 2, 5. If you want to bring this to the, and combine this even with tritone substitutions, you might end up with something like this. Which is very jazzy. It's all chromatic. E minus 7, E flat 7, sharp 9. D minus 7, D flat 7, sharp 9. C major 7 or C major 9. I've just combined the substitution of E minus 7, which is a diatonic substitution, with a couple of secondary dominant, but more importantly, tritone substitutions of the secondary dominant and tritone substitution of the primary dominant, and I get pa, 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 which is a great way to replace some chords with others, combining all of the chord substitutions that we talked about tonight. Okay. Again, I got everything in details with chord diagrams and everything, link in the description below, so you might want to check that out. That being said, about the diatonic substitution, very quickly, because I didn't want to talk about it too much, I only want to mention that when we talk about replacing chords with other chords, there is one practice that comes to my mind, although it's not strictly a chord substitution, which is the modal interchange. Now, I know that we did talk about the modal interchange already in this series in one of the previous episodes, and I also have a full video about the modal interchange as applied to specific songs, popular songs in music, where you might not have thought of them as modal interchange, but it is a modal interchange, and they are linked in the description below, where you find modal interchange video. Click on that if you want to find out more. But the modal interchange is just the practice of borrowing a chord which doesn't belong to the key that you're playing from another key, and that key is not a random key, it's a parallel key, so it shares the same root note. Okay, so if I'm in the key of C major, I can borrow, for example, any chord coming from the harmonization of the key of C minor, because that is my parallel minor key. Okay, it's not the only one. You could borrow from C Dorian, from C Phrygian, and so on, because they are all parallels. But C major and C minor are parallel keys. I'm not talking about the relative keys, which is what you get between C major and A minor, which are basically the same key. They contain the same notes, the same chords. I'm talking about C major and C minor. They share the root, the C, and in this sense, they are parallel keys. That being said, again, I can replace any chord that is included in the C major chord progression with a chord coming from the C minor chord progression, which otherwise you wouldn't be able to explain in your chord progression. Okay, so why don't we play this? One, 6 minor. We can even replace, we can even avoid the 6 minor. Let's play just 1, 2 minor, 4 major 7. C major 7 first degree, D minor 7 second degree, F major 7 fourth degree. Now, how about I play this? This is a fantastic chord progression, which you find in lots of classics of pop music, soul music, jazz, everywhere really. This chord progression and this new chord that I introduced, which was an F minor 7, by the way, is called the minor plagal cadence. Okay, when you go from the 4 minor back to the 1. Okay, now 4 major to 1 is called the plagal cadence. 4 minor to 1 is the minor plagal cadence. I talked about that a lot in that video that I linked in the description, because it's one of the best ways to really understand the modal interchange. Now, although this is, as I said, it's not strictly a chord substitution, because I'm not replacing a chord, I'm adding a chord which is external to the key. but not for that long to actually migrate to a different key, which is called modulation. I'm staying in the same key and I'm borrowing a chord from an external key. That key that I'm borrowing from is a parallel key. So F minor 7, which is my external chord, is the 4 minor coming from the key of C minor, but I'm using it in the key of C major. Now, guys, this is really crucial because you can not justify many chords that you find, for example, in R&B music and neo-soul very often, if you don't know what the modal interchange is and the practice of borrowing chords from other keys. If you don't know that, you will struggle at some point justifying with the classic rules of functional harmony some of the chords as external chords to the key, but without going into modulations. Okay, so again, I just wanted to put this in this live streaming because the modal interchange is a good way to understand external chords, and because although you're not really replacing chords, you are adding something. And we did say when we were talking about the Tritone substitution that sometimes you don't necessarily replace the chord that you're coming from with the Tritone, with the Tritone chord, but you actually add that to the original chord to spice things up. So you might think of the modal interchange with the due differences, kind of like in the same way. Okay, hopefully this makes sense. And again, feel free to spend more time going deeper into the modal interchange because I think it's one of the most interesting topics to cover in music theory once you have the basics done and you are okay understanding the degrees and understanding the keys and all the things we talked about in this series. If you guys feel like you need more about it, go back and watch the previous episodes of this series. I made everything user-friendly in a way that you don't necessarily have to watch the entire episode if you don't need that, but you can watch only the chapters that you're really interested in, okay? Now, the very last thing that I want to talk about is this extended chords, and extended chords we mean mainly 9th, 11th, 13th, but tonight we're going to talk about the 9th chords, as a bass note plus a 7th chord, which is something that we discussed talking about the 7th chords, for example, the minus 7 chords, as a bass note plus a triad. So I think we are all okay seeing that an A minus 7 is an A note with a C major triad, okay? More details about that in the previous episode, in the episode 17, I believe. But what about if we look at this? When I take this C9, if I remove the note C, I'm left with E minus 7 flat 5. So this chord here, E, B flat, D, G, is basically, I should say it in the right order, E, G, B flat, D. It's basically an E minus 7 flat 5 or E half diminished. So we can say that a dominant 7 chord extended to the 9th is nothing but a bass note plus, bass note C in this case, plus a minus 7 flat 5 chord built on the major 3rd degree E. So that's why sometimes you might see guitarists playing a blues, think about a funky blues. C9 1st degree, 4th degree, and so on. So these are 9th chords, C9 and F9, and you actually replace the dominant 7 chords with all minus 7 flat 5 chords, and you might find this. So what am I doing really? I'm playing a C9, but I'm not playing the note C. I'm just playing the E minus 7 flat 5. And again, if you don't see that this with a C on the bass makes a C9, you really don't understand why in a blues, which we all know is made by dominant 7 chords, you see guitarists playing the rhythm and bringing the rhythm and the feel and the groove with minus 7 flat 5 chords, so the half diminished chords that you really don't understand why they're doing it if you don't know that it's just a C9 chord without the root, rootless, okay? What about I now play a C minor 9 chord, so a -7 extended to the 9th? Well, you might already see that a C minor 9 chord or any minor 9th chord is made by a bass note, C, plus a major 7th chord built on the minor 3rd degree, E flat. So this is an E flat major 7. So sometimes you might find, and this is a chord substitution, that instead of playing C minor 9, the guitar is actually doing E flat major 7. And you might wonder why am I playing a major 7 chord if I'm supposed to play a -7 with the 9th? Well, because this E flat major 7, if the bass, for example, is playing the C, sounds like C minor 9, which is super cool. So I feel like this is definitely a chord substitution that you only understand if you see the 9th chords as bass note plus a tetrad, okay? You could do this even with minor 11th chords, for example, or any 11th chords, any 13th chords, but things become a little bit more advanced. I'll just show you a quick example to demonstrate this. If I take a C minor 11 here, I could think of it as a B flat sus4 with a C on the bass. But again, this becomes a little bit harder, and we touched this topic when we talk about the 9 sus4 chord, like a B flat with a C on the bass. But yeah, I don't want to get into this. I want to stay on the 9th chord for tonight. Now, one more is the C major 9. Now, the C major 9 is made by a root, a bass, with the -7th chord built on the major 3rd degree. That's why I said before when I explained the diatonic substitution how a -7 chord, if it has this note on the bass, is a major 9th chord. So this chord here, C major 9, includes the same notes of an E -7 with a C on the bass. Look at it this way. Here, this is a C major 9, omit 5. I take the 5th here. Here's the chord, E -7. This is a position for an E -7 with the C on the bass. Again, it's a C major 9. Okay, so we said so far that C9 is bass plus a half diminished chord built on the major 3rd. Minor 9 is a bass plus a major 7 chord built on the minor 3rd. And we did say that major 7 chord is a bass plus a -7th built on the major 3rd degree. We also already saw how it goes with the diminished 7th chords. We could think of a C7 again, this time with the flat 9, and we would get a diminished 7th chord built on the major 3rd. But this is not a surprise. We explained this more when we introduced just before in this episode the secondary diminished 7th chords, okay? So you can think of it as a C7 flat 9 or E diminished 7th with a C on the bass. Because the E diminished 7th is symmetrical, you can think of E diminished 7th, G diminished 7th, B flat diminished 7th, D flat diminished 7th. So the C7 flat 9 could be seen as a bass note plus a diminished 7th chord built either on the major 3rd, on the perfect 5th, on the -7, on the flat 9, basically on any of the notes that you have in this diminished 7th chord. And then one last example is taken from another dominant 7 altered chord, which is in this case a C7 with the sharp 5 and the flat 9, which is one of the chords we talked about in the lesson on the altered dominant 7 chords. Well, here I'm playing another diminished 7th chord. But this time it's not based on the major third or on the minor third or anything like that. It's actually based on the minus 7th, which is one of the notes in the C7. So you can look at this chord C7 sharp 5 flat 9 as a B flat minus 7 and minus 7 flat 5 with a C on the bass. So sometimes you might want to play this, which is a B flat half diminished. If the bass or the piano are playing the C on the bass, that will sound like a C7 sharp 5 flat 9, like this. That's exactly the same thing. So again, you can look at it as a chord substitution, or you might just want to know it to better understand the 9th chords and the alternate dominant 7th chords. Okay. Again, this could be deeper and deeper and could go over and over, seeing, you know, the 11ths, the 13ths, and more alternate dominant 7 chords. I just want to stop here because I think this gives you already enough material to work on and simply look at the extended chords from a different perspective, and maybe understand that sometimes if you find people telling you that in Rock With You by Michael Jackson there is an E flat 9, and you've always played a G flat major 7 instead, that's actually the same chord with an E flat on the bass. This chord here, G flat major 7, with an E flat on the bass becomes E flat minor 9. So if you played the G flat major 7 all your life and the bass player was playing an E flat, that's fine, because that was an E flat minor 9 actually. Okay, hopefully this makes sense. I just wanted to make a very final last minute example from an actual song. Okay, guys. I feel like I ran over time and I talked about many different things and I talked about too much tonight. And yeah, I just hope that everything makes sense. And again, I'm open to any other question you might have. So feel free to leave them in the comment section below. Obviously, if you haven't done it yet, subscribe to this channel. But I guess that if you're still here, you probably already did. But if you're watching the replay, yeah, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. Ring the bell if you want to stay notified when the next live streaming is up. So when I'm gonna be live, you'll receive a notification about half an hour before, or when a new video is up. And my next video will be this coming Friday and will be a nice funky video, very interesting. So yeah, if you haven't done it yet, ring the bell so you'll get little notification when the new funk video is out. Okay, that said, guys, again, thanks a lot for your support. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you all next Friday for the episode 20 of this amazing live streaming series that I really didn't think it would have lasted that long. Okay, hope you enjoyed it, and again, enjoy your weekend. I'll see you next week. See you soon.